is Julia. I completed a Juris Doctor degree in 2019, and I've been working for an international law firm for the past 5 years. And today I wanted to talk about the kind of things to expect if you become a paralegal or a law graduate at one of the big law firms, and what kind of tasks you will be given as a paralegal or a grad. So let's go. So when I started as a paralegal at my law firm in Sydney, I really didn't know what a paralegal's role was until I started receiving certain tasks. Then I went on to clerk at this law firm and I got offered a grad role. I transited through different teams within the grad rotations and spent 6 months in 3 different teams, including restructuring, real estate, and litigation. And I noticed one common theme across all of those roles as a junior lawyer and a paralegal, and I wanted to share the ones that I picked up as the top tasks and jobs that you will be given if you're a paralegal or a graduate lawyer in a law firm. And I'm just generalizing and basing it on personal experience and experience of my peers and colleagues. But generally, I wanted to just give you a bit of an insight as to the tasks and jobs that you will be doing. So number one, I will assign as the number one task legal research. Legal research or just general research. I did a lot of legal research when I started out, and I still do occasionally, but I would say that the first rotation that I did on the restructuring team, I did a lot of legal research within that team. And you will be expected to use resources that the law firm will provide you. And that includes online sources. So you will have certain subscriptions that you get given. We had a knowledge team, and so the librarian and the knowledge team that supported that librarian would help out with logins and assign different resources to people. So I was using resources like Westlaw and LexisNexis. On top of that, we had our own digital library where we had copies of online books and other sources and law journals and publications. And sometimes you even need to consult a real book or a published law journal. So I've actually been to one of the libraries and shifted through all of the different volumes of law journals for one of the pieces of research that I did. And that's actually quite interesting and exciting in itself, but research can become quite a long process if you're not managing it properly. So here's some tips on how to approach a legal research task, because the solicitor or the partner that's giving you this task doesn't want you to research forever. Especially sometimes there will be certain areas of the law that are quite novel, or there's a lot of gray areas in them, for example. So you won't necessarily find the answer that you seek straight away. And even if you searched for 10,000 hours, you probably will not find an answer or a coherent answer to this legal question. So when you're given a research task, always ask the person that's assigning it to you how long you should spend on it. The reason you ask is because there is an expectation of how long it'll take you to complete it, but also budgetary constraints. So if it's a legal question, and generally it is something that a client wants to know, and that's why they're posing this question to a law firm, they don't have unlimited budget. So you cannot spend 10,000 hours researching something and then we can't bill that to the client. So what you will be doing is asking how many hours you should be spending on that and putting that exact number of hours as the research task, because that's something that was budgeted to build a client. That will also indicate to you how big of a scope this research is, and if it's only a couple of hours, that means you shouldn't be spending too long. A couple of hours of research is not that long, and that means that it's not such a pressing question of such importance that the client really wants to focus on. It could be something that comes as almost like, oh, should we just double check that this area of the law is not what we think it is, or if there's anything else that's come out. So it's just a quick double check, or if there's, out of curiosity, anything else that's pertinent to this area of law. So try to get as much information as you can. Usually you won't get a lot of background because people are very busy. People assigning tasks don't usually have time to brief you properly, which is unfortunate, but try to ask these sharp questions of how long should I be spending on the task, and try to deduce what is then required in terms of scope. Then you need to ask how quickly people want it, so whether it's to be turned around within the next 2 hours, whether it's to be research that can be done at the end of the week, whether it's something that can be done by COB today. So always check when this research is required so that you can plan accordingly around your other tasks that you've been given, because most likely you will be a shared resource in a bigger team, and you won't just be working for one person. It's easier to manage your workload if you're working for one person, but that's unlikely to be the case. As a junior lawyer and a paralegal, you will be supporting a number of lawyers, a number of partners, so always make sure that you understand how this task fits into your general workload. And if you're unable to deliver by that date or by that time, you have to communicate that. Communicate very clearly to the partner or the lawyer that there's something else that's more urgent based on a task that was given to you by so-and-so, and they need it before that date, and unfortunately you can't deliver it on time, but see if there's wiggle room. But having that clear line of communication and that transparency on your workload really helps. So whatever task you're doing, just remember to clearly communicate if you're able to complete it, because once the lawyer has assigned you the task, they don't want to think about it in a good way. They've given it to you because you're a safe pair of hands to then complete that task. And if they've said, please do it by the end of the day, if you can't do it by the end of the day, you have to communicate that as soon as you can, because that person is now relying on you, and the client is relying on you to deliver that piece of research. So that's one very important tip for all junior lawyers. Communicate clearly, ask how long the task should take so that you don't exceed the budget, and that helps you manage your time properly as well. And then ask what kind of format it should come, your legal memo, your legal research should come in. Is it just a quick email to the lawyer that's given it to you or a partner? Is it a short memo based on your firm's precedent? Ask if there's a precedent. Potentially there is a memo that this associate or lawyer really likes, or they've used some precedent in the past, and it's easier to then see how things are done in the firm, and so you won't be just making up your own format. Always ask what kind of formats that they expect the research to be delivered in. A useful thing to do when you're doing legal research is to make a record of all of the sources that you've checked. And so, you can then refer to the sources if you found some information, and as well as when you haven't found any information, and that happens more often than you think. There'll be a lot of times when you think, oh, well, surely somebody's written about this topic, or surely there's a case on this particular question, and you'll be surprised when there's really nothing out there, even though you spent the 2 hours and you've looked in every single legal resource that you have, and you have not found a single thing, or you found some things that are very, very distant to that question, so that you really haven't answered the question. So instead of coming back and saying, I found nothing, I would keep a record of every single source that you've used, of all of the search terms that you've inputted into the system, and I would make a track record of everything to then say, I've tried to search in these sources and I found these cases, but they weren't quite what we're looking for. I also searched these sources and there was also nothing on this question. However, I found a case that might be relevant with a similar fact pattern, for example, but I don't believe that. So I don't believe that it's useful to this particular question. So I would really walk the task giver through what you've done to make sure that you've covered all bases. And if you're really struggling, I would not be afraid to go back to whoever is giving you the task, earlier than when it's due, so that at the end of the time, you don't go back and say, I found nothing, here's my sources. You could go back and say, look, I'm actually not finding anything. So the hour that I had to do this, I'm really not finding anything. Is there something else that we could search that's alternative, or is there anything else that we could do to try to expand our ambit? So yeah, depending on your legal task, if it's legal research, it's going to be case law, it's going to be legislation. Try to cite your cases correctly as you were taught in law school and with legislation as well. It can also be regulations. It can be, any kind of research that you can imagine. And sometimes you might even have to rely on Google. But I wouldn't be using Google to search cases and to search legislation. But if it's something, the latest technology and you're just Googling what it is and what it does, and there's nothing about it that has, proper sources from like a legal library, then you can rely on Google as well. Task number 2, I would say proofreading. Proofreading doesn't sound like a very exciting task, and it's not, but you will be asked to complete proofreading a lot. And what it does is it helps the lawyer and the partner. It helps to have a second pair of eyes on the drafting, 100%. It helps you start to understand what's required when it comes to legal drafting, because you're reading and you're noticing typos and grammatical errors, and you're checking for consistency and to make sure that the document actually looks solid. To make sure that it does, you have to check the formatting. Your firm will definitely have its own house style, so check with the secretary or other paralegals and other junior lawyers whether there is that house style, and see if you can get trained on that. Make sure that you understand what that means, whether it's specific formatting in terms of margins, bullet points that are being used, whether it's numerics or letters or numbers, whether it's a specific way to highlight things or capitalize certain terms. Make sure that you understand that, so that you're looking for those inconsistencies as well. Make sure that, of course, you're checking for typos, you're checking for misspellings of words, and where you have different kinds of spelling, so for example, US spelling versus English spelling versus Australian spelling, check what kind of spelling is required. So if the client is a US-based client, it probably makes sense to have American spelling. However, if there are inconsistencies between, for example, the word authorized with a Z and then the word authorized with an S, check which one you're using and make sure you're using that consistently throughout the document. Definitions are really important. So a lot of the times in legal memorandums and pleadings, there will be certain definitions that are being used, contracts, and make sure that every single thing that's capitalized or has a capital letter is defined somewhere, and if it's not, flag that in the comments. Make sure you proofread in track. Usually you will be asked to proofread in track so that any changes that you make to the document, the lawyer and the partner can see what changes you've made before they can accept those changes or reject those changes. And any kind of inconsistencies that you spot, make sure that you pull that out in the comment section to make it easier for the checker later. Proofreading is a task that can be also quite dry, and so once you've done a couple of proofs where you've gone down the page, I would actually PDF the document if it's in a Word format and read the document again in PDF, because that changes the way that you view the words on paper. Then another tip is printing out the entire document and actually checking it on paper. You should be doing that at least once. I know we're trying to save trees, but at the same time, if you want to pick up every single error and you want to be quite thorough, printing out a document really, really helps, because it's just something about the way that we look at paper and screen that changes the way we perceive certain formatting and spelling. So it's very, very helpful if you can read something on paper versus a screen. And if you don't want to print, I would print PDF the document and go through that on your screen. And I think that that helps as well. Recently, what I've been doing is I've been proofreading a document from the top and then from the bottom, just because your brain starts to skip parts. It becomes lazy, it wants to go faster, and then you also have memorized some of the words on the paper, so you're not going to pick up these small errors as easily. So start from the bottom and go to the top as well, and that's really helpful. That's a tip that I only recently found out, and it's actually changed the way that I proofread as well. And proofreading is something that you're not going to escape in your legal career. You're going to do it from the paralegal role to the grad role to every single associate level, to senior associate, to legal director, to partner, and continue to proofread until the end of days that you're still a lawyer, because that's just the reality of the job. That's the job. The job is proofreading the documents before they go to the client. So it's an important task, even though it sounds like it's not. It's a very important task. And again, just as the previous advice, ask when the proofreading needs to be done by, and if it clashes with any of your previous assigned tasks, make sure that you tell that person that's assigned you the task so that they understand your workload, your capacity, and they understand whether they can give it to you or whether they can ask someone else or whether they need to proofread it themselves. Just keeping people in the loop as to what workload you have, it's really important. In number 3, I would put things like filing. It's probably going to be online. It's going to be a system that the law firm uses to do online filing and system document management. And you'll probably be asked to put certain emails or documents into folders. You will be asked to keep a track of all of the files that are coming in or the documents that the client has sent. You might be asked to assemble certain documents a certain way and then save them. So for example, email communication needs to be put in a chronological order and then be placed in a specific folder, whether it's come from the client, whether it's communication between the law firm and the courts or the tribunal in an arbitration or a dispute, whether it's draft contracts and you might need to label things in correct folders. So understanding that hierarchy in terms of labeling files and managing the file system is very important, because that needs to be quite accurate. And if you're labeling things correctly, it's going to make everybody's lives much easier later on when you need to find a document really quickly. in an arbitration and in an M&A deal, for example, the amount of documents that a firm can receive is incredible. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of documents, emails, communication drafts. And so being able to file those correctly for evidence in court, for future reference, for any kind of issues, or even creating chronologies, it's going to be a huge help. So understanding how the associate or the partner like to have their files compiled, understanding how the document management system works, so that's a bit of technical knowledge, and I'm sure you'll be trained on that. And if nobody's bothered to train you, please reach out to somebody that understands the system, whether it's a partner, an associate, a paralegal, an IT guy in your firm. Please, 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 please make sure that you understand how to use the system, and then there won't be any issues going forward. Because if you'd spend, some months in the firm and then everybody kind of expects you to already understand the system and you've actually never learned and nobody's ever showed you, then it becomes an issue. But if you put your hand up and say, I want someone to teach me, please, I'm new, I really, really need to learn, somebody will reach out to you and actually help you. So that would be a big tip from my side, because systems are different from law firm to law firm, and it might not be what you're used to, but also people prefer filing in a certain way, and so it takes time to figure out your team's specific dynamic and the way that a partner likes to see documents, for example. So make sure you ask. Other tasks that you might be expected to complete might involve some drafting. You might be asked to look at a precedent in a contract, for example, and draft a certain clause. And it's nice when people ask you to have a go at drafting. So an associate might ask you, would you like to have a go at drafting this clause? And, yes, put your hand up and say, please, could you give me precedents? Could you give me a bit of guidance? And then I'll have a go. And of course, your first few drafts are going to be not so great, because it's literally the first time that you're doing it. But it comes with practice, right? And so the first time you draft something and then somebody else reviews it, there's going to be a lot of edits. Whether it's going to be red pen, if people have printed out your work, or whether it's track changes. And sometimes you might not even see the final product. You'll send out a first draft and then nobody will ever tell you when and what happened to it and whether it's gone to the client. But if you are keen to learn, I would always reach out to that associate that gave you the task and say, I just really want to see the final product just for my learning, and do you have any feedback for me? And sometimes people will just send you the final product or forward you the final email that's gone out with the document, for example. And what I would do is, if it doesn't have track changes, if the associate or the partner doesn't have time to show you the track changes, go into the system, and there's usually a version of a compare document system. Ask IT or ask the other paralegals or associates if that's something that's provided. Every law firm should have one. So it's doc compare or something like that, where you put your original version of the document and the final version with all the changes that were put in by the associate and the partner that was sent to the client, and you compare those, and the system will spit out a version that will have red line, so it'll actually show you what changes were made, and all the commas and all of the everything that was done to this document that looks different to your document. And so that's very useful for you to file those or review those in detail, because often, and most of the time, I had to do that. I had to learn myself. A lot of the times people will not have time to sit down with you and teach you things. So you really have to take the self-teaching into your own hands when you work for these busy law firms where nobody has time for anything. So this habit of comparing documents. There's been a lot of helpful partners and helpful associates in my career that have actually gone, here's the track changes, here's what I've changed, please review it. If you've got any questions, come see me. And again, they're very, very busy people. So if you get that kind of feedback, be very grateful, because it's very rare. And that person spent time out of their billable hour day to actually go through and try to teach you. So I think that that's something that instead of thinking, oh my God, they're critiquing my work, think of it as they're giving you this gift of feedback, which most partners and associates will not give you. So if you found somebody that does that, it's a great gift, and learn from that person as much as you can. And make sure that you say that you're grateful for all the time that they've given you for your learning. When I was in the litigation team, I spent a lot of time putting together court bundles, and that's just books of evidence of all of the relevant materials that you want the judge to see, and you're submitting that to back up your pleadings and your submissions. And court books have a certain format, and after the pandemic, all of the court books that we worked on were done online. So that was a whole other thing that we had to do in terms of putting PDFs together, and a lot of these court books will have 700 plus pages. So if you've ever worked with a PDF that has 700 plus pages, it can be very slow, it can be very painful, there can be a lot of errors in terms of pagination, in terms of indexing. So you have to have incredible attention to detail and know that the team is relying on you to be the final checker of whether the pages are correct, whether the headings are correct, whether what you've said in the index actually refers to the correct page. Because you might think that this is also a mind-numbing task, but when you actually go to the courtroom and the judge is looking at the court bundle and the barrister is saying, Your Honor, please turn to page 27 of the court book, because that is the case, or that is the letter or the email that we're using to back up this submission, and the judge starts flipping to page 27 and it's wrong, or he can't find it. It's really embarrassing and also really, really not beneficial to the case. Really embarrassing for the barrister, really embarrassing for the law firm. A lot of the times, if you're a paralegal or a law grad, you probably won't be in the courtroom, and so you don't even see that interaction, but it's not a good thing. So please think of it that way. Please think of, my work is going to end up with the judge, and they are not going to find this page if I made a mistake. I wouldn't panic about it. I wouldn't panic about, oh, what if I made a mistake? Have a system of how you check, of how you proofread. For example, I proofread a document 5 times, and I do 3 versions where I read from top to bottom. I do 1 version where I go from bottom to the top, and then I do 1 printed version. And that way you've got a process, you've got a system of how you're proofing for mistakes. And beyond that, you've done the best you can, because you're also trying to be practical with your time. You can't be proofreading 1,000 times. That's impractical, that's impossible. And so find a compromise that works for you, but find a good system where you've gone, well, I've done these checks. Have a checklist, potentially, of how you're checking for whether the page numbers are accurate. Maybe ask somebody to help you double check the index again, double check the numbers or the client name. That's really important before you send anything. Just quickly take a look at that again. It's just these little checks that you set up for yourself that will really help you in the future and will avoid, everybody will make mistakes, and you will make mistakes. And I've seen the most amazing, brilliant, smartest people make mistakes, and it just continues because we're human. Nobody is mistake proof, and it's something that we just do. Like, we make mistakes, we're human, we're tired, we get tired, we forget something. It's natural. But the more checkers that you put in place for yourself, for your own sanity, the more questions you kind of ask yourself around your work, and then the framework around that, the less stress that you'll have later, that, you know, you've sent something and you're not going, oh yeah, I forgot to check this thing, and what if I make a mistake? And it's distressing to sit there and think about this. So the more processes that you can start learning from your junior years, and also pick up some tips, you know, ask other colleagues how they proofread, ask other colleagues how they do research. Everybody's method is different, and you might pick up some things that work for you, and you might pick up some things that don't work for you. So it's a trial and error process, but it's something that you have to go through. And yeah, these are the general tasks that I pull out at the top of my list. But if there's anything else that you want to know, paralegals, junior lawyers, how to survive in a law firm, please let me know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, I'm glad. I make this content to be helpful, because when I was studying law, I couldn't really find any great sources, especially for Australian lawyers. I just didn't find anything online that was really helpful or insightful. So I'm trying to change that. But please subscribe to this channel if you like the content, and I'll try to make more of these kinds of videos, and you can also connect with me on social media and LinkedIn. So until next time.